No, I was born in Glasgow, but my parents were both South Ulster. Born in Glasgow.
Right.
And the whole Glasgow thing of, you know, Celtic and Rangers, the whole. In fact, it was as intense as Belfast and as any part of Ulster, the Catholic Protestant thing. So I grew up with that, and it was very familiar to me before I came. Before the war broke out, we stayed then in Clones in County Monaghan.
And were your parents from Monaghan originally?
Yeah, my father was Cavan, my mother was from Anna Stock. And, so in fact, I couldn't be more South Ulster than I am.
So when you came to write Victims,
Yes.
you had a deep understanding of the polarities that existed within the society you were in.
I did have, unfortunately, why I was able to move through the different classes was fairly early on. In my early 30s, I met Guthrie, so I was introduced to his house and to, if you like, the landed class, and that gave me quite an insight into. Now he didn't behave like them, but he knew all them, so I got a feeling for how they thought and how they behaved, and I think that helped in the final part of the trilogy, Victims.
Was it initially a play, or was it a...
It was initially a novella.
Novella,
It was
yeah.
published first by Godans, separately as a novella, and but after I had written the other two, they didn't want to put the three together, which was a shame. Finally, the three were put together. Yeah.
Right, okay. You've been in Monaghan since
1955. I went to 1954. I went to the farm that my father had bought. When the war was breaking out, he thought the Germans were going to invade and that the money would be worthless, and he bought a decent farm on the border. And when I finished my arts degree, I thought, I don't want to teach, because everywhere you went to teach, there was a clergyman. And I'd had enough of priests.
Yeah.
I didn't want a priest for a boss. And I said, I'd like to try farming, and my father said, you won't last 3 years. Mm-hmm. And here I am, so 55 years later. So.
at 80 years of age?
Yeah, at 81 years.
81, excuse me.
Yeah, that's okay, yeah.
So when did the writing start?
The writing started when I was about 10, and it's kind of embarrassing and corny. It was a dog, a red setter dog that died, and I wrote a poem, and I still have it, in the back of a stamp album. And it rhymed, but it didn't scan. But it was full of sincere emotion. And my instinct was to write a verse for this dog. But when I was 7, I read a book called Bright Trappers in the Rockies, which was by an American, and you can imagine from that title what that was about. And from that moment on, I wanted to be a writer. I thought, this is a wonderful thing to be able to create this world, you know. And once I bumped into Keats, like everybody else, I wanted to be Keats, you know. And that went on till I was about 18. You know, writing bad poetry. And
would you feel that writing has given you a better quality of life?
A better quality of life?
Yes.
Well, it's very interesting that as you know, there are up to 10 and 15-year gaps between books, stuff that I've published, because I was farming. And I never felt the compulsion that I had to sit down and write every day. But when I wanted to write something, I would really work at it night and day. But I didn't have this thing that, you've got to do 500 or 1,000 words a day. Never had that, and don't understand it, that sort of clockwork thing. I do understand what Eliot says when he talks about automatic writing, which I think that is. And I'm very wary of the word inspiration, but I would use the word compulsion. You know, if you have a thing keeps coming back to your mind, you think, that is a compulsion. That's not inspiration. I've got to get that down. And that's as far as I go. But, you know, the gaps, I don't understand. I don't think I'm a professional writer. I never was. People have said that. What's wrong with the man? Why doesn't he write? It's not blockage. I don't believe in blockage. I just didn't want to. I preferred to farm.
The idea for Death and Nightingales came one evening.
It came sitting in a May garden with a man in his 80s who was looking across our lake to a whole big scrubland, and he actually told me the story of the girl coming down, and it was a drunkard who was actually lying in there sleeping off the booze, And he could hear them and see them. And he went out and he stopped this girl who was stealing, literally from the family. Now I've changed everything. And she went back. I said, that's an astonishing story, John. What happened to her? She went off to America. And I thought, well, that's no story. We've got to get some. So I mixed up the whole sectarian thing, and but it came from that one idea of that profound betrayal of of a lover betraying somebody for money and burying her, So.
But the extraordinary thing was that the book itself had a direct ironic twist in it in the end, which very much like the Colleen Bawn going backwards.
Right, yes. Same thing happening again.
Same thing happening again, yeah.
That at the moment, Jonathan Cavendish seems to be going to make it into a film.
Right.
There were emails are going back and forward all the time.
And Parnell, where did the Parnell and the...
I think Parnell comes in just, I suppose, because of my fascination with Joyce, and because Joyce was so fascinated with Parnell that I read everything I could about him and understood the fascination. That's all, just the Land League and Parnell and that family, and I've been to Avondale a couple of times, and I only learned recently, and I bet you don't know it, Parnell was a Catholic.
I didn't know.
You didn't know that? They didn't keep a priest in the house, but he was a Roman Catholic in the sense that the landed gentry, if they were Catholics, well, they might have kept a priest the way they kept a coachman, but they didn't go to the local church, or if they had a church, they had it by themselves. I don't know if it was known, but you go Google it and see.
Right.
He was a Catholic, non-practicing, obviously. And that was why the bishops, they all knew this. They thought he's a very, very bad, not only just Kitty O'Shea, but a very bad example to the general public, a non-practicing president as a Catholic,
Where did you take the inspiration or the background for the Percy French concert?
My grandfather was a Percy French nut.
Yeah, right.
And I always enjoyed him, and I always thought that he was farcical and silly and all the rest of it, So that's, I made the young lassie be slightly hostile to him, and then made him into a much more political and sympathetic person. I think that actually, in fact, he was, though he must have been, he was very loved.
He was a pop star of his time.
He was pop, yeah. Can you imagine if Billy Connolly could do an Anglo-Irish accent? Mm-hmm. He would be fantastic. He's actually the embodiment of Percy French. That kind of humour and,
I think what impressed me most in Nightingale, outside of the wonderful narration, which is your trademark anyway, was the fact that you achieved probably one of the best historical novels in Irish literature, for my money, but you did it without pretension.
Well, I probably didn't know I was doing it. Apparently, the Examiner had Miles Duggan, Nuala Donal, Theo Dorgan, and somebody else. And they said about 2 years ago, Theo told me, I didn't see it, he said, we reckoned it amongst the best 10 novels of the last 100 years. He didn't say historical, best. Thank you, Theo.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
And one I certainly loved. During our conversation before we started doing this, you mentioned that your favourite genre is the novella.
That's right.
And actually, you did mention that Victims was, first of all, a novella.
That's right.
Before it was a play.
That's right.
At the age of, shall we say, 78, 79, you produce a novella, The Love of Sisters.
Yeah.
Strong, dark,
Yeah.
a sense of betrayal, but also a wonderful sense of reconciliation. What brought that book on so late in your life?
I suppose I've been playing, well, as I've said to you, out of our house there came 4 female vocations. A brother who went off to be a Jesuit. I toyed with the idea of being a priest myself, so I grew up in a very religious household. So having these nun sisters, I heard an awful lot about convents and convent life and all the rest of it. There's only one of them left alive. And sometime I thought, the way a lot of writers think, some of that will have to be got down. Along with that, the second part, the betrayal part of something, was a reality that I knew about, that we say, within the family. This whole thing of a sister walking in actual fact, walking in another sister, in the middle of it. And to me, that's a kind of But it's not just embarrassment, there's kind of terror and betrayal and awfulness in it. And I know there can be forgiveness, but so I combine the two. And the stuff in the convent is absolutely taken almost verbatim from what I heard. The second half, again, is based on fact. So, where did it come from? It came out of my experience. All the cliches that other writers tell young writers, write about what you know, about what you've heard. That's where it came from.
And an excellent novella it is too.
Thank you.